That's more than a third higher than the same period a year ago. Daniel Cotton is a Hong Kong-based e-commerce analyst, and he's been telling more about how Alibaba has been making all that money.
Globally, immediately, they rolled out a set of help merchants' products flooding into the China market. Hard at their retail promotions. They're a really big way of driving money in China. They're very big fixed date promotions, and Alibaba got behind.
Expanding into fresh food and groceries.
Yeah, they've done that. We've seen fresh food and groceries on e-commerce expand all over the world during COVID, and that was exactly the same in China. And they also have a great advantage also because they run offline stores, so you can the same platform that you would do any other e-commerce transaction, and it could be delivered or picked up in store, and it's completely seamless.
People often compare, don't they, Alibaba inevitably with the American company Amazon. I was reading today that Alibaba has more than 740 million customers from its retail operations in China alone. I think that's less than half the number of total active customers on Amazon.com. They're quite different businesses, really, apart from using the internet to sell stuff.
I think they're very, very different businesses. I mean, just in terms of size and scale, I mean, e-commerce in China is, many times larger than e-commerce in the United States and growing faster. But I think also it's the experiential shopping. During COVID, we saw a really big acceleration of what they call live streaming, which is basically like shoppable programs on your telephone where you watch somebody selling a product, they give you advice, and if you trust it, you buy it.
And of course, relations between China and the United States aren't great at the moment. I think at the weekend, President Trump said he could exert pressure on more Chinese companies in addition to his famous attempt to ban TikTok. Do you think that's a worry for the likes of Alibaba? I don't know to what extent Alibaba has been trying to target more sales in the United States.
I think we see a few things. So first of all, Chinese consumers still have not turned away from US or Western brands. I do think alongside that we've seen an emerging trend. China's young consumers who have way more disposable income than young consumers in other markets, but they have very strong alignment to their contemporary culture in China, and I think that's going to change the requirement of Western brands to be really successful. They're going to have to really talk to these up-and-coming, high-value Chinese customers.
That's Daniel Cotton, Managing Director of Essential in Hong Kong. Let's find out how investors have been reacting to that news from Alibaba and get some more of the latest news from the financial markets. I'm joined by Mrna Montgomery of Fidelity. Mrna, Alibaba famously quoted on the New York Stock Exchange a few years back, the world's biggest ever flotation at the time, I think it was. How's it doing today? What do investors think about these numbers?
Well, investors are very impressed by the numbers, so the shares are up quite strongly there. But it's also part of the ongoing boom in the whole tech sector, really. They're all the real winners of 2020. I mean, just the other day we saw Apple become the first US $2 trillion company, and the rest of these big tech giants in the S&P 500, which is the tech stocks are really riding a very strong wave at the moment.
It couldn't be a more different story for airlines, could it? Qantas reported numbers today. Pretty bad reading.
Yeah, terrible. So you've gone from the winners there in the tech sector to the absolute losers here. They've borne the brunt of all these changes in our lives. The loss there of almost $2 billion Australian dollars for Qantas is quite shocking. But as its boss said, it's really not that surprising given that these are the worst trading conditions these airlines have ever seen. Global travel bans, these start-stop air corridors. The airlines don't know if they're coming or going, and unfortunately, the job losses are mounting there. 4,000 of the 6,000 planned job cuts there are going to be completed by the end of the next month. So it's a very, very bad time for investors and employees in the sector.
Grim picture indeed. Mrna, thank you. That's Mrna Montgomery at Fidelity. London's main share index at the moment down 1.6% at 6. this year. That's all because of the coronavirus. Here in the UK, the authorities have said official results can be based on estimated grades from teachers. These British teenagers who picked up their exam results today, though, it was still a nerve-wracking experience.
Recent months hasn't been the best. You got good grades. Whoa!
It's what I've got all passes. There's no pressure anymore. It's just out of our hands. I wasn't very good at exams anyway.
I feel like initially it was very confusing for me because I didn't know if I was going to get the grades I deserved, and I felt very out of control really. I tried to not think about it the past couple of months, tried to keep myself distracted, but I'm just happy that today I got the results that reflect what I could have done and I would have done. So I'm happy.
Well done you. Well, I've been speaking to someone whose academic path wasn't quite as smooth as she'd hoped. 28-year-old Mrna Vaccine from London had to take a gap year because the competition for university places was so high. She now runs a digital fashion business called Cashmere.
I applied to a lot of universities and I actually didn't get offers for like the universities I wanted to go to. So obviously like I was quite disheartened, I was sad, and I was like, what am I going to do? Because the universities that I did get an offer to, I didn't really want to go there. So that's why I decided to take a gap year and so then improve my my CV and get like work experience. I worked at a big I speak to young people who might not necessarily have gotten grades or gotten offers to universities that they want. If they can afford to, like try and get like some work experience that's a relevant industry that you want to work at, or maybe if you want to be an entrepreneur, maybe start working, like get work experience at a startup, just to get some first-hand knowledge of how it actually works.
Right, so academic certificates aren't everything, is your message to young people this week, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just how the world operates. Like, to get into these universities and get good grades and so on, but it's not the end of the world if you don't happen to get those grades. Because I know people personally who didn't necessarily get the best grades at school, but they're doing pretty well in their careers now because they just worked really hard.
And how useful do you think were paper qualifications when it comes to the business you're doing right now, the fashion business that you've set up? Is there any relevance to you?
Not really, no. I think there hasn't really been that much relevance for my academic qualifications and my current role, my job. What I would say though is that what I've actually found the most useful was the life skills that I developed while I was at university, while I was doing my work experience, because that's actually what is needed in order to actually thrive really well. Like, exams only just test how well you can retain information in 2 hours or so. It's not necessarily a good indication of like whether you're actually an intelligent person or not. For people who might feel like because they haven't done as well in the GCSEs or the A levels, thinking that's the end of the world, it's not. You just need to find a different way of getting to your dream goal.
Mrna Vaccine, you've been getting your grades over the past few weeks. Well, I hope everything's worked out for you. Why not tell us about your experience and your hopes for the future? You can do that on our Facebook page. Just search for BBC My Bloody World. Business News is constantly updated on our website at bbcworldservice.com. Thanks for listening.
This is the BBC World Service with the story of the Red State refugees. In the Republican red state of Texas, a refugee workforce probably saved the small town of Cactus. Hundreds of them work at its biggest employer, but they don't stay for long. And with Texas drastically cutting the number of refugees it will let settle there, who will replace these workers when they move on? Red State refugees. Tuesday at 8 and 14 GMT. And in an hour, we join Mrna Vaccine for OS.
The name Steve Bannon is trending right now as news comes in that the former White House chief strategist has been arrested after being charged with defrauding hundreds of thousands of donors through the campaign We Build the Wall. It's an online fundraising effort. We'll be in the States to hear the latest details.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Welcome to the inquiry on the BBC World Service. The last few months have seen a global race to find a vaccine vaccine to stop the coronavirus pandemic. All of them trick your immune system essentially into recognizing the virus and producing antibodies and T-cell responses to it. But how close are we to being able to inoculate people on a global scale?
If we don't get the pandemic under control everywhere, then it's really still out of control everywhere.
Are we allowing ourselves to rely too heavily on the hope of using a vaccine to stop the pandemic?
Get a shot in the arm once or twice and problem solved. That's a very seductive vision of the future.
This week on The Inquiry, how close are we to a vaccine for COVID-19? Join me, Tanya Beckett, for The Inquiry, coming up after the news.
Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. Donald Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has been arrested and charged with fraud and money laundering. He's due to appear in a New York court later today. North America correspondent Nick Bryant reports.
Steve Bannon helped mastermind Donald Trump's surprise victory in 2016, worked for a time as a top advisor in the White House, and has become a globally recognized figure on the populist right. He's been charged with fraud for his role in an online fundraising campaign, We Build the Wall, that raised more than $25 million to finance a barrier along the Mexican border. The U.S. Attorney in Manhattan alleges that Mr. Bannon and 3 other defendants defrauded hundreds of thousands of donors, capitalizing on their interest in funding a border wall to raise millions of dollars, under the false pretense that all of that money would be spent on construction.
Doctors in Russia say they're doing all they can to save the life of Alexei Navalny, the most prominent critic of President Vladimir Putin's government. He collapsed on a flight to Moscow, suffering from suspected poisoning. One of the team treating Mr. Navalny said he needed to be moved to a hospital that specialized in toxicology. Tests have been carried out to determine the exact cause of his illness. Dmitry Peskov is President Putin's spokesman.
The doctors will do whatever is necessary. The best doctors in Omsk are involved. As far as we know from the media reports, they're consulting with the experts in Moscow. Of course, we wish him a speedy recovery, like any citizen of our country.
A court in Britain has sentenced the brother of the suicide bomber who carried out the Manchester Arena attack in 2017 to a minimum of 55 years in prison. Hashem Ababy was found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and conspiring to cause an explosion. 22 people were killed in the bombing at an Ariana Grande concert. Vegan Murray's son, Martin Head, was among those who died. She made this statement outside court.
Today's sentence signifies the end of another chapter in our lives, and we... Although our lives have been deeply affected by what happened, we can now at least put the trial behind us.
The South Korean intelligence service says the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, has delegated some of his responsibilities to his sister, Kim Yo-jong. The new head of the agency said Kim Yo-jong was now managing domestic affairs, though her brother retained overall control. He said other policy issues had also been handed over to key aides, and that the move had been made to relieve stress on the North Korean leader. The agency chief said it would also avert culpability in the event of policy failure. World news from the BBC. Iran says it seized a ship registered in the United Arab Emirates after 2 Iranian...
Very much indeed. Blackfriars Underpass eastbound shut. Broken down lorry. Congestion back to the Embankment station, affecting traffic heading into the city. Lily Road, Fulham is shut between Normand Park, Fulham and Earl's Court. So congestion back to West Ken on North End Road and Fulham Broadway Station near the Ibis Hotel. This accident, the 74, the 190, the 430 are on diversion. Blackwall Tunnel southbound slow after an earlier breakdown. Clapham Common south side of Clapham Park Road, still huge queues heading up to that. Temporary lights had to be put in after the lights were damaged in an accident some time ago, and it causes major queues, especially heading out Brixton. Limehouse Link Tunnel, a lane out because of a broken down vehicle from Butcher Road. Lane 1 of 2 is blocked. A reminder that Vauxhall Bridge is closed to all but cyclists, buses and London licensed taxis until December. Billy Reed's BBC Radio London Travel. More travel for you in half an hour.
On digital radio.
94.9 FM.
The
would be the arrest of council members. A spokesman for one of South Sudan's vice presidents says 6 of his bodyguards have been shot dead in a rebel attack on their convoy. James Wiley Iga was not in the convoy at the time. The spokesman said a vehicle was destroyed and burned by rebels from the National Salvation Front. Mr. Iga is one of South Sudan's 5 vice presidents. And Sri Lanka's president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, has addressed the opening session of the new parliament, saying his first task will be to abolish a constitutional provision restricting presidential powers. Mr. Rajapaksa said he and his brother Mahinda, the Prime Minister, have been given a massive mandate to make change. The Prime Minister's party won a landslide victory in parliamentary elections 2 weeks ago. And that's the latest BBC News.
Welcome to the inquiry on the BBC World Service. I'm Tanya Beckett. Each week, one question, 4 expert witnesses, and an answer. On Tuesday, the 11th of August, Russian President Vladimir Putin emerged on TV, flanked by Russian flags.
Вакцина против новой коронавирусной инфекции. Я в этой связи
Putin announced that Russia had approved the first vaccine for COVID-19, a pandemic that's thought to have racked up a global death toll of some 750,000 people. The vaccine was named Sputnik 5, a reference to the surprise 1957 launch of the world's first satellite. Putin was drawing a not-so-subtle parallel between the space race during the Cold War and the global race for a vaccine. The Russian president said his own daughter had been given the vaccine and was doing fine. The news was met with alarm and disbelief. Only about 76 people had received the vaccine, and it hadn't been through the 3rd phase of trials in which thousands of people are normally tested. The vaccine may be waved through in Russia, but almost certainly no other country would approve its use. So, how close are we to a vaccine against COVID-19?
Part 1. Tricking the system. A virologist at the University of Columbia's Center for Infection and Immunity. When do you think we might see the first vaccine? I mean, the point at which somebody holds up a vial and says, here it is.
I think the earliest we might see it is the very end of 2020, the first couple months of 2021.
Research institutes, pharmaceutical companies, and state agencies all over the world are working pandemic, which has infected more than 20 million people globally. 3 vaccines from China, 2 from America, and 1 from the UK are recognized by the World Health Organization as having reached
technology platforms. All of them trick your immune system essentially into recognizing the virus and producing antibodies and T-cell responses to it.
The vaccine in the UK is being worked on by the University of Oxford, global drugs firm AstraZeneca. It uses a virus which is similar to chimpanzees. One of the protein spikes is swapped to make it appear to the body like coronavirus.
The spike protein from SARS-2 is what is thought to be the major target for the immune system. And so they give you that virus that is a chimpanzee adenovirus that is tricking your immune system into thinking it's a coronavirus, and then you develop antibodies to that.
In the US, the front runner is being developed with the support of a firm based in Massachusetts called Mrna. It's a so-called mRNA vaccine, which uses a different system.
The mRNA vaccines are when you effectively take a piece of genetic material and you basically put it into somebody and you produce that spike protein, which your immune system then responds to.
And a third method in China being worked on by a company called Sinovac Biotech uses the virus itself
in an inactivated form.
You render it non-infectious but still structurally intact, your immune system will respond to the shape of that virus, essentially, when you put it in a person.
All of these vaccines have been tested for safety and immune response in a small number of people. They're now in what is called phase 3 trials.
That's where you give it to a lot of people, thousands, tens of thousands, and then you look to see how many of them are actually protected as they go about their normal lives and become exposed to the virus at some point. You'll be able to compare them to the people in the control group and see if fewer people got sick, then that vaccine is working.
When vaccines are tested on animals, the animal can be challenged with the virus or given it deliberately to see if it works. But this is typically not an approach used when it comes to testing on humans because of the obvious risk to their health.
You have to recruit trial participants who are in hard-hit areas, so they will have a greater likelihood of being exposed to the virus. That's why some countries that have seen their numbers go down are actually conducting their phase 3 clinical trials in other countries, such as Brazil, where there is widespread transmission currently occurring.
The concern is that there is extraordinary pressure to get a vaccine out quickly.
Are there risks associated with that? There certainly are. If you are doing this very quickly, you don't have as much time to look at the data. You may not recruit the right subjects. You may not recruit people, for example, who are at the highest risk of getting severe disease.
All of which would lead to less accurate results relating to how well the vaccine works. Although a vaccine that works on half of the people might be good enough, a fact that may seem surprising.
A lot of people are confused by this, I think, because they say, well, if it only works in half the people, does it even really work? Yes, it does. And so every year we get flu shots. Those range from 40 to 70% effective. We are hoping to protect at least 50% of the people either from being infected or from developing severe COVID-19.
If half of the world's population could be protected against the risk of contracting COVID-19, then this would have a fundamental effect on the spread of the pandemic. But how big a task is it to get a vaccine out of the lab and into all of the countries around the world affected by the virus?
Part 2. Scaling up.
It's huge. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It is huge.
Our second expert witness talks to us about the mammoth task of rolling out a vaccine.
My name is Saad Omar. I'm the director of the Yale Institute for Global Health.
There are facilities already being built to manufacture vaccines, some paid for by pharmaceutical companies, and billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates has also pledged to fund the construction of several factories.
We haven't done that before, and certainly it's unparalleled at this scale. As a rule, you scale up production after your vaccine is licensed or very close to licensure. And the fact that we are doing that is a very smart thing to do, because the loss of life and the impact on livelihood justifies playing it safe and investing it now, even if some of these investments go unused or are wasted.
A facility could go to waste if it's designed to fit the technology of a vaccine, which is ultimately shown not to work. Then we would need to build more to manufacture the vaccine or vaccines which emerge as successful. But Saad says the good news is that either way there is a solid global supply of the right technological expertise.
In the past 10 years, the overall intellectual ability to produce vaccines and even develop vaccines has spread beyond the usual suspect in the Western world. Now, some of the major manufacturers are in countries like India and China. So that gives us a little bit more room in terms of having the human resource that can be utilized or even adapted for large-scale manufacturing in a pandemic.
Once the vaccine has been produced, there's also the question located close to where it will be administered. This is a logistical problem for many poorer countries, not least those who don't have a reliable supply of electricity.
There are nuances in terms of the temperature at which these products will be stored, the space that would be required based on how they're delivered. Each product's nuances add to the uncertainty around planning for these distribution networks, the scaling up of access that is needed.
There are, of course, transportation and storage networks already in place for vaccines, but they're set up to inoculate children, often in schools, and need to be adapted and extended to accommodate potentially the entire population. There's also the very significant logistical difficulty of vaccinating in the midst of a pandemic.
The last thing you want is having long lines or a bunch of people in closed, confined spaces getting infected in line for getting vaccination. Someone would ask that if they're going to get vaccine, that takes care of the problem. But here's the problem. Even the best vaccines, once you inject them, take a few weeks to kick in. So in that window, you remain vulnerable. So the logistics of vaccinating people under those circumstances need to be worked out. The good news is there are ways to do this safely. Places where people have cars, you can do drive-through vaccination. That's what will be discussed. The concerning part is that we need to start planning for it now.
But there are other vaccination programs from which we can draw experience.
We have addressed other logistical challenges related to vaccines around polio eradication or near eradication of polio, around smallpox eradication, around substantially controlling outbreaks of meningitis in Northern Africa. So we have the tools to do this, but we need to strategize, we need to plan, we need to put in place these operations now.
If the technology is close to being available and the expertise for rolling it out is already within our grasp, the type of planning that Saad is talking about will then depend on countries' ability to cooperate with each other. As we're about to discover, this may be the weakest link in getting us close to a vaccine.
Part 3. Vaccine nationalism.
Our next expert witness is a trade economist.
My name is Chad Bowden. I'm a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C.
When the pandemic started, the US and China were in the midst of a trade war. Perhaps unsurprisingly, then, when America needed protective equipment, it used tariffs and export restrictions to serve its own interests and hoard a large supply.
COVID condom. We had some successful condom usage. Masks are the equivalent for COVID-19. And we do need to work harder to persuade the population at large that when they leave the house they should wear a mask, and if everyone does that, transmission will fall considerably. And it's interesting to observe how in some East Asian countries that has proved perfectly feasible, and mask wearing is ubiquitous, and non-wearing of a mask in public is met with social stigma and also with on-the-spot fines.
But you can say on-spot fines when you're wearing a condom. I can see that being tricky.
We never tried that.
How close are we to the vaccine? We know that some of the vaccines developed have been shown to provoke an immune response. This does not mean they will provide immunity in the larger population, something that will become more evident as phase 3 trials progress. What has been achieved in a few short months is unprecedented, but we may still be very far from a vaccine that can reach right around the world to release us from the grip of the coronavirus pandemic.
This inquiry was presented by Tanya Beckett and produced by Vivian Jones and Sharon Hemans.
This is the BBC World Service. Now take a moment to listen to this. Commitment.
I think every one of them knew that this was going to be an incredible achievement for humankind.
And determination.
We have to run the physics to understand that this route is not incomplete.
Feelings of unease.
I was not comfortable to go to the street because some people they were looking at me as if I might still focus or not.
This building represented my life. It meant everything to me. The human experience.
The bandit has always been in the imagination of the Mexican people.
They came to hear the music, but they experienced it all the day.
It's always enrichment when two cultures come together.
Documentaries on the BBC World Service.
She looked down at the phone and rapidly mouthed the words, "Push off."
To listen, go to bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. On the BBC World Service in just a few minutes.
We've seen the juggernauts have to come to terms with things that were institutional within their organizations.
I'm Mrna Jackson, and on the food chain this week, we hear how a misguided Halloween costume led to a Twitter storm about racism in food writing, and ultimately the resignation of 2 food editors. How did we get here, and how do we move forward? Join us after the news.
BBC News with Chris Merrill. Donald Trump's former election campaign manager Steve Bannon has been arrested and charged with fraud. He and 3 other suspects are accused of diverting hundreds of thousands of dollars from a fundraising campaign to build a wall along the Mexican border. The money is said to have been used for personal expenses. Mr. Bannon is due to appear in court in New York. Doctors in Russia say they're fighting to save the Republican anti-corruption campaign Alexei Navalny. He's being treated for suspected poisoning. His wife and doctor traveled to Untitled Chapter and tried to have him moved to a specialist hospital in Western Europe. A court in Britain has sentenced the brother of a suicide bomber who carried out an attack on Woolwich Ferry. The presently suspended because of a technical issue. Blackburn southbound A102 was struggling anyway because of a couple of breakdowns. Fulham Lily Road remains closed because of an accident between Fulham and Old's Court, causing problems for North End Road. Around Fulham Broadway tube stations near the Ibis Hotel, 74 119 430 diversion. Of course, it gets busy out there anyway with Hammersmith Bridge being closed. That is ongoing. The London Bridge is closed and Vauxhall Ridge is closed until December to all but cyclists, buses and London licensed taxis. Blackfriars Underpass eastbound has now reopened, but because of a breakdown, still a little bit sluggish heading towards the city. Billy Reeves, BBC Radio London Travel. More from me in half an hour.
BBC Radio London.
Everyone has a story to tell.
The number of Muslim girls in sports is increasing.
أسمع وجماعة وكذا dyslexia. open to everyone aged 11 to 18. Find your voice as we show you how to get it on TV, online, and on the radio. Search BBC Young Reporter Competition to find out more. You have a voice. Entry closes on the 31st of October.
BBC Radio London.
This is honestly, there's little space to write about these stories. There's so much change that has to be done. We're really at the tip of the iceberg.
This is the food chain from the BBC World Service. I'm Gray Jackson. This week, how the world of food media has been turned upside down, with a number of resignations at leading US publications, following allegations of racism, misogyny, tokenism, toxic work cultures. It's a long list of issues that many argue are long-standing systemic problems in the industry. Problems that have been brought into focus because of the unprecedented times we're living in. A time where a pandemic is disproportionately affecting Black people and people of colour. And a time where smartphones capture and show the world abhorrent incidents of racism.
Please don't come close to me. Please don't come close to me. Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Or sickening footage like the video showing a white police officer kneeling on the neck of a Black man for over 8 minutes. These events have led to widespread soul-searching around how institutions are run, and the world of food writing has been one of the industries at the forefront of these discussions.
It seems like a very long leap to start talking about, editors at legacy media publications being fired, but I think people finally, for the first time, started to see the relationship between these events. Fundamentally, I believe what this moment is calling for is for those who are in power or who have held power to begin to relinquish it.
This week we're exploring the twisted story that got us to this point and asking, could this be the reckoning food media needs? This story starts in June 2020, when not one but 2 editors at big food publications resigned, which is where our first guest, Tammy Taklamariam, comes into the picture.
I've never felt such urgency to really have this thing that feels so urgent before me, and so I have found it really hard to abandon the narrative at any point, just because the problem is far from addressed.
Tammy's a freelance food and drinks writer based in New York City and known for being very vocal on Twitter. She's not afraid to write about the world as she sees it, riff with other food journalists, and as it turns out, make some pretty serious allegations. The first of those was against Adam Rappaport, editor-in-chief at Bon Appetit, a magazine which is read by millions and has a hit YouTube channel called The Test Kitchen. 2 things happen in quick succession. A Puerto Rican food writer shares on social media that Rappaport was dismissive of her pitch about Afro-Puerto Rican food. Not long after, Tammy sees a photo from 2004 where he and his wife are dressed up as, well, Puerto Ricans.
And so a couple of people, knowing that as the background, sent me that picture overnight. And he wasn't wearing makeup or anything, but it was clear that this was a costume, and also that it was on Halloween. So, yeah.
This is what's known as brownface, a variation on blackface, where someone imitates a person of colour, be it through makeup, hair dye, or clothing. It evokes racial or cultural stereotypes and is considered racist. Tammy posted this picture on Twitter.
Very quickly after, I'm getting lots of messages from all of my friends in food media just saying, wow, this is intense. And then also, shortly after, a few of the people of color at Bon Appetit started tweeting statements saying, this is really, the final straw. It was certainly a tipping point for them.
One such staffer who felt compelled to speak out was assistant food editor Sola Al-Wahili. She alleged on Instagram that white colleagues were paid for their appearances on the magazine's YouTube channel and that people of colour were not. And her colleague, Christina Che, said that she too was never given a single dollar for her test kitchen appearances. Several employees vowed to stop shooting new videos until everyone received equal pay. However, Bon Appetit publisher Condé Nast has publicly denied this allegation. We contacted Bon Appetit for an interview. They refused, but a company spokesperson told us that, quote, a third-party investigation on pay disparity found everyone was compensated fairly. We also found that race had not played a factor in setting compensation for any video team members.
As soon as those conversations started happening, it started to galvanize their fans, and then people are sort of looking for like more follow-up, and it was such a mess. And so I just kept the drum beating on the message that Adam Rappaport needs to be fired, and later that day he resigned.
He said he was deeply sorry on Instagram, saying that he needed to, quote, reflect on the work that I need to do as a human being and to allow Bon Appetit to get to a better place. Bon Appetit have publicly issued a long overdue apology.
We're all going at our own speed. At Enterprise, isn't much.
晚安。咁咧，總此個問題我就唔會好想講啊，因為呢個問題好煙悶，講真。其實如果唔係咧，香港啲政治議題咧被 stir 到咁嘅地步咧，我相信好多嘢值得更加討論。即係咁好似熱狗劫活理花園嗰啲喺原則上 challenge 嗰 5G 嗰個，你自己喺西方國家住過先至好講嘢啦。熱狗咧永遠都係㗎，佢只係喺個井裏邊生存呢班人。你知唔知好多鄉郊地區係冇個骨幹梗係光纖啦？咁問題係你掘條光纖入去鄉下度咯，唔簡單。我真係覺得熱狗係有一個財團永遠都唔講嘅，叫新 X 界。點解佢唔講新 X 界？自己諗點解啊？真係以黃洋達呢啲真係仆街嘅。嗱，翻正嗱，阿 Trump 咧就講咗兩次表嘅。琴日佢嘅記者會咧又講表，佢話表係一個好公平嘅。咁啲人問阿 Trump 同阿表你識唔識？我估未必識。但係如果你話純粹係 Penny 即係阿彭斯拍工，令到阿 Trump 會講嘢，我覺得又唔係似嘅。其實呢樣嘢香港有好多都唔明。阿 Trump 依家做唔到，因為阿 Trump 你見到佢每個月都係咧將佢人工嘅指標捐俾唔同嘅政府部門，俾基本上義工嚟嘅，即係佢真係講得出做得到，佢增期嗰張票真係俾嗰個政府，佢唔係吹嘅，佢係真係做過嘅。但點解一個咁嘅人，阿 Trump 係一個點嘅人咧？即係好多人都好頂阿 Trump 嗰啲咩作風，其實係因為佢以前做，你知美國二世祖咧嗰啲作風有啲。即係嗰啲咩勞工水網絡嗰啲嘢，即係嗰啲人你覺得好難頂嘅嗰啲。第一問題係你個二世祖有嘢冇，呢個係香港二世祖根本都冇，香港二世祖有百佳嘅。咁但係美國二世祖有嘢冇，就係佢哋好希望好渴望有一個英雄感，即係除咗就自由之外，仲有一英雄感。例如你話鐵甲人嗰個就係 Iron Man 嗰個，或者蝙蝠俠。點解佢哋個劇情咁過癮？就係蝙蝠俠係有錢人出身，走去只會用自己嘅錢改裝各類裝備，跟住做大俠。同樣道理 ，Iron Man 鐵甲人裏面都係㗎，嗰個好有錢。有錢到做，即係點解一個咁嘅有錢人，即係點啊？要做晒成身裝甲，跟住做肌肉，最後即係好多人都唔明呢啲嘢係點樣嘅。呢個其實呢啲咁嘅劇情咧唔係幻想嚟嘅，呢個係好美國嘅一個culture嚟嘅，因為美國係不嬲都有啲，就係有錢佢真係發唔知發出立乜。 係發咗財之後，因為你財有個限度啦，你就算你係全世界最有錢嘅人，即係好似李嘉誠咁樣，你會方百世唔一定會方百世，你捐錢俾某個地方，咁跟住有個你嘅名個地方都唔一定會方百世，有乜嘢會用方百世？成全世界點啊？即係點啊？唔知係威足一世，係威足幾百年。點樣去做一件事威足幾百年？呢個就係美國啲好多現世嘅問題。所以見到佢哋有啲有錢人可能做zero startup 啊嗰啲都係。其實你要了解下 Trump 點解會羨慕阿寶仔，即係有錢人就去搞間報館，然後搞間報館之後跟住咁你哋覺得哇，跟住點啊？唔理咁多，佢總之佢其實已經好鬼嘅財富，佢買咗蘋果好起嘅，佢唔做，佢寧願俾人嗌，公開俾人嗌好似完全海蓋就唔到。點解嗰樣嘢就係其實阿 Trump 想要？咁啊，你要知道呢個 Trump 嗰類型嘅人，佢哋點諗嘢？其實一本書我之前我成日同其實我好想講呢本書，一本抄啊！我叫 Charlie Wilson 嗱，呢個你見到係電影版，即係電影嗰個劇照嚟嘅。依家因為改編個電影嚟，個真人就唔係Tom Hanks嘅，我真人就俾大家睇個真人嗰位國會議員，呢個係一個國會議員。戴住帽嘅白種人，即係望遠鏡，就係 Charlie Wilson。但係 Charlie Wilson Johnson 呢條友做乜嘅？呢條做乜嘅？呢條友係德州嘅眾議員啊！德州唔係得電鋸啊！我講明先啊。OK， 雖然成日喺香港就係德州同電鋸咁埋一齊，但係德州唔止電鋸啊，德州有好多唔同嘅嘢，有好多奇人異事啊！呢位就其中一位嚟自德州嘅奇人異事。呢條友做過啲乜咧？幫 CIA 攞到分定，資助嗰班咁嘅塔利班。嗰時塔利美蘇冷戰期間嗰時，塔利班都未起恐怖分子嘅，提供呢個反坦克武器，射爆蘇聯啲直升機、輕航器咁啫。但係呢個點咧就製造咗個嚟自美蘇聯，結果就掃爆。呢條友係掃爆嘅其中一個搞出呢件嘢嘅人。即係除咗Ray 即係列根嘅星球大戰唔完計劃之外咧，阿富汗開革最後變咗個例子咧。多謝呢位花花公子咧，呢條友係極有趣嘅，即係呢個真人係靚仔㗎 Tom， 其實 Tom Hanks 唔啱馬抄標神，因為佢冇嗰種花花公子嗰種格調，即係佢其實阿 Tom 就係個真人版嘅佢嘅，阿 Tom 就似Tom Hanks 就唔係個。我點解成日講呢本書啊？呢本書我首先講啊，我都中意呢本書。但係你知我黃世特不嬲睇書嘅口味嘅，我有啲書我睇唔多次，我睇唔到喎，我可以睇10幾次，即係10幾次唔同嘅 chapter， 因為一本書好多時800，即係我可以揸本書揸到，但係我就好少實體書，我就比較唔會出寫落嘅，我都能係 iPad， 因為畫花書有時會 reference 翻，因為我啲字係會飛，即係我嘅做法有少少，即係我亦都公司因為公司我做法，我大概知道個 chapter 我飛唔飛，即係當然我排咗自己都可能。呢本書講嘅嘢基本上係點解呢本書好睇嘅？呢本書係話俾大家聽好多事。呢本書可以話俾大家聽美國嘅國會慶典，所以點解話我對美國啲即係其實香港人轉發最終會點有趣嗰條方係點樣講出嚟？其實我係睇呢本書所睇到嘅事。你會知道美國嘅內閣嗰啲議員點樣做外交，或者國會議員點樣可以點樣辦，即係點啊？做到你唔一定游水總統嘅，其實你游水一個好同你點啊？好 buy 你嗰套嘅國會議員已經夠嘅話，聽你已經有機會成功啦。即係你好似香港人權民主法，你游水講阿媽游水有龐菲牛咪龐菲牛做咗。咁游到同你推落底喎，咁解㗎嘛？即係呢本書講好多嘢嚟，呢本書超好笑嘅呢本書，因為呢本書好笑咩？因為本書好鬼多好粗口嘅本書，即係你可以想象到美國啲政客傾偈嗰時咧，就全部都係嘅嗰啲F 嗰死嘅，但係嗰個好成件事，好黐線嘅成件事，即係我覺得個電影版唔夠好笑，唔夠書好笑，一個你書可以直接寫啲錯落去。你諗下，你書可以寫錯，你反而就係你電影你播唔錯嘅，你嗰啲 F 嗰啲全部街㗎嘛。即係如果就算廣東話配音，我一定講啊，你係要搞掂啲錯落去啊。你如果係要呢個味道，佢好多就係翻咗都係黐線咁傾嘢講得嘅，即係佢連啲 chapter 嗰啲名啊，嗰啲標題都係錯落去講嘅，係直接俾錯。即係佢最後嗰個 chapter 嗰個標題 Here to you motherfucker 係個哇係好爆嘅，真係。其實呢本書講嘅就係一個美國中央情報局嘅基層，佢好想搞好想對用嗱嗰個喺度啦，呢個㗎。但係因佢就冇資源幫我發達，跟住咧佢就透過一個交際花，佢透過個交際花 啦，OK，總之阿 Charlie Wilson 踢佢堂啦，OK， 好啦 ，Charlie Wilson 踢佢堂，跟住阿 Julia Fairing 咧就碎啊，就 Charlie Wilson， 喂，不如幫呢班友啊，即係佢一個成日都走去點啊，會請個私人脱衣舞嘅嗰啲，跟住又點啊，即係嗰啲又真係走錢，即係可能幾條女係咁浸，你咁浸，即係浸爽牙啊，我唔知啊嗰啲啊，嗰啲咁嘅人，跟住佢覺得佢又好中意幫 underdog， 但美國好中意幫 underdog 嘅 ，OK， 即係美國人係有一個 passion for the underdog， 即係佢特別啲二世祖，我覺得喂，我幫個 underdog 一把好笑，咁跟住佢就照呢個又想溝佢，又有 passion for underdog， 咁呢個諗嘢又與眾不同嘅，咁喺一個德州咁嘅 Bible Belt。即係嗰啲人虔誠到飛起嘅地方出現花花公子，我覺得呢件事真係爆幾度啱嘅，好爆嘅其實，好唔定㗎，呢條係好與眾不同。跟住個議員辦事處咧就唔係擺個 office 嘅時候去揾架車就嚟走去，呢條好正嘅人，真係好正。佢就一步步將美國嘅武器交俾當時嘅南。跟住咧點咧？你知即係要事過大啊！又譬如話真係佢係點解做好多女仔嗰啲咁嘅送啲武器？咁結果咧就蘇聯你知啊，攞一支反黑武器換你一架直升機，蘇聯有幾多架直升機？你諗下點打落去？打唔落去嘅，不對稱戰爭嚟㗎嘛！你就冇乜成本嘅，我後面就俾少少錢喎，你點玩到你自己？呢個係一個危招嚟嘅，一個黑洞。佢都製造咗一個軍事一個黑洞嘅元素，咁結果蘇聯最後咧就真係搞唔掂，阿富汗真係搞唔掂，再加上星球大戰2計劃又要軍備調取，咁樣就話兵不之下打解咗蘇聯呢個咁嘅情況，即係唔需要一場正式嘅戰爭，只需要靠靜坐戰而完成對一個邪惡帝國嘅瓦解。呢個係某個程度上係一個軍事。Charlie Wilson 係用佢係真係廢戰術嘅執行者，佢係間接路線，佢唔係直打嘅，我都唔係。我係知咗條友用呢個反貪用最平嘅武器，就係咁懟咁美啲武器，係咁嘥錢。所以呢個點我對呢本書有興趣咧？除咗個古仔教咗咧，佢兼且就係佢。你諗下，即係佢嗰啲朋友、嗰啲密友，有啲係非開封面嗰啲女，你就知道呢條真係好爽嘅，好經典嘅嘢，即係一個咁間接嘅事情。所以亦都係點解好多人話得唔得？我反而我對呢啲人咧，我反而覺得佢有機會做。我點解就係因為我就係睇過 Charlie Wilson 話俾我聽。呢啲你睇好似唔撚正經嘅人咧，反而只係正經。即係你諗下，奧巴馬都好正經軍事啊，佢做啲咩？我話奧巴馬白，佢好靚嘅，所有包裝，佢最識包裝。阿馬英九。反而睇下啱你幾唔開到咩韓國7月9成咁，國民黨啲人貪錢嘅陳水扁，當然陳水扁係會支持嘅，但係陳水扁有一件事係呢個除咗第一次政府問題，有一樣嘢陳水扁做完之後，台灣嘅問題長治，但係台灣不嬲有長期以嚟都有金融，即係點啊？銀行業執笠，即係嗰啲小公司執笠，成日都有發生。陳水扁一個咁講法，去台上拍，去雙向解決咗呢個台灣金融， extraordinary 嘅 political thinking。我創嘅 political thinking 都唔係由呢個咁嘅思路，你用出你用出生活去理解啊當創，即係你當創自己崇拜目標，但係呢啲假設即係講即係你聽嚟好匪夷所思嘅大佬，但係其實美國好多呢啲話。你知道點解而家特朗普又同打到落腳？即係你拉票嗰個一定係衝住晒，你就係點啊？你而家就係激起呢個基礎，佢哋一定會玩到，你點會唔玩到？你10年玩到底啊！跟住睇下點玩啫。即係當然呢本書講個 story 係好鬼爽，因為佢係CIA 就做嘅，跟住花嘅時間好快，佢哋俾班友大佬嗰班友話即係唔知乜頭乜腦，老實講俾個人聽其實，即係如果日後知道如果呢班人去做分子嘅話，我估啲人肯定諗過，肯定做緊啲唔係佢會議員之前要 place 過嚟。但係 at least 你知道就係美國人可以好玩啊！即係佢呢咁嘅 direct approach 嘅事情，所以你啲人話唔會制裁人講緊佢哋做乜嘢 ？Sorry 啊，美國人佢真係做戲嘢嚟嘅，你 emergent， 依個係你唔識嘅 ，don't know what it is， 你唔知道呢個國家出過啲咁嘅慈善，出過啲咁嘅喪，而且呢啲人係講緊100年前咁嘅人，呢條友做呢啲咁嘅事，即係上世紀80年。呢啲嘅人係一直存在嘅，但係嗰啲某個程度上係你當中大，OK， 即係為咗溝女，為咗自己嘅 personal 玩得多，為自己嘅奇怪政治諗法，乜嘢都佢總之佢有辦法一條有單到同埋搞件事，自己入埋阿富汗嘅大佬，呢個真係 crazy 嘅呢個。我頭先講咗真係佢入埋阿富汗啊！你諗過未啊？佢入埋阿富汗，大佬再攞啲自己都攞埋啲機槍玩埋一份黐線嘅呢啲啊！美國就有啲咁嘅人，美國就有啲咁有趣嘅人，美國就係一個咁嘅國家。你中國而家會同呢啲咁嘅國家為敵，你諗清楚先喎你。即係我覺得習近平都洗濕咗，即係美國人咧好多時喺我喺度交地。可能就係如果佢真係認真去做事你係想象唔到呢個係一陣子英國都係 Boris Johnson 呢條友你睇落幾多發咗樣，即係我自己又唔係，即係成嗰啲成咩處理呢個西咁個金華國桑教嘅事，如果係你德國嗰陣唔教，咁問題係，好啦，一個多當時一個即係佢成日講嘢，佢講到好正嘅，佢條友真係間，跟住佢啲女朋友之關係嘅嘢嘅關，咁啊佢同佢依家1年之前，即係依家生個仔啦，1年之前咁話大佬兩拗交拗到，佢工作都有得食花生再男仔要隔。佢個間屋企嘅隔離室都係啲空港呢個有晒啊！1年幾之前仲喺度食花西好嘅小樣，係咪？即係因為拗交嗰啲嘢，即係依個人係一啲好奇怪、好奇有趣嘅人嚟。呢個波裝，但係最後你咁樣波裝 Brexit 好醜佢都有用嘅，佢起身尾佢攞咗個大選 mandate 搞。算係真係 exit from 遠得飛去 BNO 5+1都係佢，你有乜好講啊？有時咧，我覺得華人社會呢樣嘢我真係接唔講啊！唔好睇少一啲咧，睇落好似唔多正經啊，做嘢硬啊，或者有啲嘢譬如係可能佢平嘅自己人做風扇好似比較。好似咩嘢嘅，喂好多時真係做到嘢嗰啲歷史上都係呢啲，佢有嗰種 passion 做 可能呢啲人係喂大佬平時太唔清晰啫。但係如果佢真係喺一啲突發嘅場合，佢會發揮到佢嘅意想不到嘅程度。但係呢一度我可以同大家講，阿侵好明顯喺香港問題上會有好似嘅。佢覺得佢都想做呢樣嘢，大家仲要諗一樣嘢，肥佬仔其實好多人比較大國民嗰套電影，主角大國民嗰套電影個主角其實係有個歷史有人物啊，嗰個叫做 Herb Scott， 就係 Cosmopolitan 嗰本雜誌嘅出版商 Herb Corporation 嘅創辦人。所有嘢有一路一條線嘅，所有嘢有根有據，有全部一條線嘅。呢啲嘢你了解美國文化，呢個係美國文化嘅深層部分，但係永遠都冇人同你講。就係美國有一啲花花公子或者二世祖，同外面嘅二世祖唔同，佢哋係可以同時吃喝玩樂，而又會對社會有好大嘅貢獻，因為佢哋想流芳萬世。咪百世萬世，而華人世界有嘅一係咧就好古板嘅有錢佬，一係咧就係花花公子，大家係撲街到冇，除咗使錢乜差都唔得。呢個就係當中嘅分別。今晚都講到呢度，今晚就真係講書嘅呢本書，呢本書係我成日睇嘅呢本書，我講過好多次。即係如果你叫黃世澤去講一本書嘅話咧，我係好奇，因為我睇書得出嚟嘅嘢好多時會咧就反映就係我啲奇怪諗法嘅人，我都話我係東邪，對唔對？東邪P座話合體嘅，我真係有隻 P 座。咁今晚就講到呢度，咁啊，聽朝再見啦。
Woolwich Ferry at the moment, expect delays. It's already been quite difficult crossing the river at the Blackwall Tunnel anyway, southbound because of a breakdown. So no Woolwich Ferry presently. Issue. Lily Road, Fulham, shut because of an accident earlier between Fulham and Earls Court. The 74, the 190, the 430 are on diversion, and of course that adds to the problems heading out of town on the A4 because Hammersmith Bridge remains closed, London Bridge remains closed, and Vauxhall Bridge is closed until December to all but cyclists, buses and London licensed taxis. Billy Reeves, BBC Radio London. More from me in half an hour.
BBC Radio.
Virus. I'm going to play some of the diverse opinions that we have received from you around what should happen if or when a vaccine becomes available. There's a lot actually with coronavirus that we want to discuss this hour. We're seeing a rise in reported cases in many countries around the world, so we want to bring you the picture in India and also Germany. That'll be in the next 10 minutes or so. Our medical expert today, it's the virus hunter, Dr. Emma Hudcroft. I want her opinion on those surges. Also, on a new study I was listening to about today. It's from the US. It's about the high viral loads that kids carry when they have COVID-19. And we're wondering what implications, if any, it should have on schools reopening. And then after 5:30, we're going to continue to hear conversations about the impact of COVID-19 on education around the world. We'll talk with teachers and parents about kids with special educational needs during this pandemic. Some people really, have to say, struggling to try and get the support that they need. But let me turn to some political figures right now. You've probably been hearing a little bit in the news bulletin there as well. Breaking news over the past couple of hours that President Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, has been arrested and charged with fraud. Our correspondent in Washington is Barbara Plesher. Hi, Barbara.
Hi,
Hi there.
Good to have you with us. You know, I just want to play a little for our listeners because Mr. Trump was speaking just a few moments ago. He was meeting with the Iraq leader, but he was asked about the charges against Mr. Bannon. This is what he had to say.
Well, I feel very badly. I haven't been dealing with him for a long period of time, as most of the people in this room know. He was involved in our campaign. He worked for Goldman Sachs. He worked for a lot of companies, but he was involved likewise in our campaign and for a small part of the administration very early on. I haven't been dealing with him at all. I know nothing about the project other than I didn't like, when I read about it, I didn't like it. I said, this is for government, this isn't for private people. And it sounded to me like showboating, and I think I let my opinion be very strongly stated at the time. I didn't like it. It was showboating and maybe looking for funds, but you'll have to see what happens. I think it's a very sad thing for Mr. Bannon. I think it's surprising, but this was something, as you know, just by reading social media and by reading whatever it is and by speaking to Mike and all of them, I didn't like that project. I thought that was a project that was being done for showboating reasons. I don't know that he was in charge. I didn't know any of the other people either. But it's sad. It's very sad.
So there you have it. Barbara, what do we know about the charges against Mr. Bannon?
Well, so Mr. Bannon and 3 other associates had this fundraising organization called We Build the Wall, which was to raise money for a section of the wall along the U.S. border with Mexico, and they raised $25 million. And Mr. Bannon had said that this money would all go to the project. It wouldn't go to any of them, but in fact what the indictment says is that hundreds of thousands of dollars did go to them collectively. Mr. Bannon got $1 million, which he used to secretly pay one of his co-defendants and also to pay his personal expenses, according to the indictment. And so they are now being charged on counts of fraud and money laundering. They've all been arrested, and they are expected to appear in court today. The maximum sentence for these crimes is 20 years.
Interesting there to hear Mr. Trump distance himself from the project, or Mr. Bannon, I suppose. And, you know, people are asking, particularly Trump supporters, is there any evidence that he could be in any way linked to Mr. Trump? And you tell me whether you think even the fact that Mr. Bannon has been arrested whether it could have any detrimental effect on the president at this point, I suppose, in the election campaign.
Well, there isn't any evidence that Mr. Trump has been linked to this project in any way, including criminally, which would be the key thing here as to whether it would affect the election. Politically, Mr. Trump has sort of fell out with Steve Bannon a number of years ago when Mr. Bannon gave an interview to the author of that book, Fire and Fury, which was a very unflattering look at the internal workings of the administration. So when Mr. Trump says they haven't been in touch for a while, I think I'd be inclined to say that that's not surprising. And he has, I think, expressed skepticism about the project before. One of his concerns was that he didn't think private money should be used for a public project like this. He thought it would be inferior construction. So nothing in terms of the record or his comments at the moment really links him either closely to Mr. Bannon or to the project. So I think that the fallout is not very large. It should be said, though, that this is the 6th close associate of Mr. Trump to be facing criminal charges.
I was reading a tweet, Barbara, from our colleague John Sopel. He says, so far today, Steve Bannon is in custody. Federal judge rules against Trump over his tax return. Stock market falling, his jobless total rises. Obama tax still reverberating. And this was at 10 a.m. in Washington. I suppose you've got 10 past 12 at the moment. But it's quite the day. And does it feel now like the election is in full swing? Because I think it's tough for us and our listeners around the world, perhaps, to know, because we are in such a strange time of a pandemic, to feel that same energy, perhaps.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, because it's now, I think less than 80 days to the election, and we're having the conventions now, which are traditionally the point where the momentum really begins. The Democratic convention this week and the Republican convention next week. It's no, because of the COVID pandemic,
The conventions are largely or partly online. For the Democrats, it's all online. For the Republicans, it will be partly. And so it's kind of hard to get a sense of that momentum and energy around it. But certainly the Democrats have stepped up their attacks on President Trump, quite viscerally stepped up their attacks. Mr. Obama's takedown of the president and of what he thought was his threat to democracy was quite stunning, actually. I think you're going to hear just as much of a broadside next week. So we are definitely getting into the final course, and it sounds like it's going to be pretty hard-hitting and nasty.
Barbara Pettisher, thank you so much for spending some minutes with us today on a very busy day, as we've been hearing in Washington, D.C. Right, let me move on to another figure, political figure. You might have also heard throughout the day that the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, that he is in hospital with suspected poisoning, unconscious, we hear. Sergei Goryashka is from BBC Russian, joining us today from Moscow. So tell us what we know so far that has happened to him and his condition right now, Sergei, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, the latest we know is that Alexei Navalny is still in a very great condition, in coma, in a hospital in the Siberian city of Omsk. Doctors, and these reports are unconfirmed, but they say on some media that he has been poisoned by some toxicological agent. There were even reports that he's got something even wrong with his brain already, but these reports are unconfirmed, and the Minister of Healthcare of city of Omsk denied that he has any brain problems. Doctors are still trying to figure out what has happened with Navalny and what exactly is this toxic agent he's been suffering from. But what we've seen is that the politician had tea in a cafe in the airport of another Siberian city, Tomsk, and he entered the plane, and then just minutes after the takeoff he felt really ill, and he's been shouting, crying for help from the plane's toilet. The plane was being immediately landed after that, and he's been taken to the intensive health care in Omsk. That's a Siberian city where Navalny is now. His wife is also there, and she's talking to the doctors if they could allow to transport him into the hospital abroad in Europe, but for now they are saying that his condition doesn't let him to be transported anywhere.
Tell our listeners who are not familiar with Mr. Navalny the significance of him, particularly within the political context of Russia.
Well, he's the Russian opposition leader, the most vocal critic of President Vladimir Putin, and he often refers to Mr. Putin as the head of a party of crooks and thieves, meaning the United Russia Party, the ruling party in this country, which Putin is the leader of. And lately Navalny has been criticizing the changes of the constitution which allow Putin to run for president for another 2 terms, and he's been even trying to participate in those presidential elections back in 2018, but he was barred from running because he has been convicted of embezzlement back in 2014, and this conviction, which Navalny refers as a political one, he denies any wrongdoing. This conviction didn't let him to run during those elections. So that's the main opposition figure in Russia.
Thanks very much, Sergei. We'll continue to follow it on the BBC World Service. Sergei Goryashka from BBC Russian joining me from Moscow. You're listening to OS from the BBC World Service. Let us turn to Iraq now, because there were lots of people sharing the name Riham Yaqub on social media. She was a doctor, an anti-government activist, and she was shot and killed in the city of Basra. Now, the identity of those who killed her is unknown, but it is not the first killing by gunmen in recent days. Last week there was another activist, Tahsin Osama, who was killed. Other activists were fired upon in their car, and it comes amid a return of violent protests in the country. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the country witnessed months of protests. These saw hundreds of demonstrators shot dead by security forces and gunmen suspected with links to militias. Iraq's Prime Minister has responded to the latest killing by sacking Basra's chief of police and other security officials. People, meanwhile, are sharing their tributes to Dr. Riham online, also posting photographs photographs of her. So we reached out to people that are living in the country. They sent us some audio messages, and I should say they wanted to stay anonymous for their own safety. This woman knew Riham and fears for her own life.
Hello, I am not well because of the recent event that took place, and my heart hurts at the death of my friend Dr. Riham, and I was threatened a few weeks ago too. I left Baghdad since yesterday because of the fear and the threats, and I can't live there in Baghdad. I am very afraid, and I am waiting my friend to come here. She left Baghdad too. I'm sad. I'm very sad.
Hello. As we have heard of the series of the murders that has been taking place in all of Iraq, it's becoming very dangerous and scary. With a simple guilt, you might get easily killed with a cold blood. Recently, we got horrified by the murder of Riham Yaqub, the nutrition in Basra. Such an actions will make all of us as a woman and even men to stop saying anything and just live the way it is, unfairly, with all the bad life situation. And this means we all are dead inside, but we're just living the day as it is. I don't understand how we are supposed to be feeling safe anymore with all of this happening, and especially as young people who want to live just like any other person in the universe. I hope, and I really hope, the government will do anything to make us feel safe again and end up all of these problems.
Thank you so much for your messages. I was just watching. Did her name come up at all? There is more on the killing of Riham Yaqub on the BBC News website. You just have to search BBC and Iraqi activist. This is OS on the BBC with Nuala McGovern. Let's take a look at some of the main coronavirus headlines right now. Globally, there are more than 22 million. In the US, more than 1 million people have filed new claims for unemployment benefits. Infections in the world. In South Korea, gatherings of more than 10 people have been banned in the capital Seoul. The number of new infections there is the highest it has been for 5 months. And we're just seeing that Airbnb, they run holiday rentals, they've imposed a worldwide ban on all parties and events at places that they list for rent on their site. It's an order, they say, to help stop the spread of coronavirus. Let me see, it is 20 minutes past the hour. I want to say hello to our medical expert today, Dr. Emma Hudcroft, molecular epidemiologist at the University of Basel in Switzerland. Hi, Dr. Emma.
Hello, very happy to be here again.
Good to have you with us as well. Just have a good old read through your Twitter feed. My goodness, you've been busy. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I want to first bring to you and our listeners a couple of our correspondents in different parts of the world that I suppose we could say are struggling with the coronavirus. I suppose where is not. But India has today reported the biggest daily increase of cases so far. Here's my colleague Divya Arya in the capital, Delhi.
India has seen a consistent rise in deaths and positive cases due to COVID for the past many weeks. And the government has been throwing more numbers at those numbers to give context to this rise. Now, the last 24 hours saw India register the biggest ever one-day rise with almost 70,000 cases. But the Health Ministry pointed out that the same period also saw the country's highest tests in a day, 900,000. So India, which had faced criticism for low levels of testing in the early days of the pandemic, now the government says that because they increased testing, that has led to an increase in positive cases and deaths. In the beginning of the week, India crossed 50,000 deaths due to COVID, a number which has now gone up to almost 54,000, which means an average of about 1,000 deaths a day this week. Now, despite all assurances by the government, including one in which they say that the fatality rate in India at less than 2% is one of the lowest in the world, experts say that the numbers are still a cause for worry. Now, they point to under-reporting and under-recording of COVID-related deaths as one reason. They're saying they're not correctly recorded in many hospitals, but they also speak about a relentless rise in cases. The curve, they say, has flattened or fallen for a bit in many countries before rising again or declining significantly. But India has not seen any respite at all. Now, partly this is because after imposing one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, the country started opening up in a bid to boost the economy. Even as parts of the country open up and other parts had to reinforce lockdowns to contain the spread, there was a massive loss of work and deep setbacks for poor families. Little children asking for money or food on the streets have become a common sight in far more numbers than we are used to seeing on the streets of the capital. Affording masks or social distancing is next to impossible for them. In a country with already high levels of inequality, COVID has doubled the burden, as there are still many concerns who cannot afford high-quality private healthcare at all.
Thanks so much to Divya. Let's turn to Europe now. There has been surges in Italy, Spain, also Germany. Officials there warning that the country's important tradition in November, the carnival season, might have to be cancelled to stop the spread. Here's our correspondent Jenny Hill in Berlin.
Big season. Every year between November and February, people in the south and west of the country dress up to celebrate carnival. Revelers decked in bright fancy dress drink, sing and party in packed halls and crowded streets. But there's now fierce debate over whether this cherished tradition can go ahead at all, as the number of new daily infections continues to rise. Today, at just over 1,700, it's the highest it's been since late April. That's partially a result of increased testing. There were around 875,000 tests last week. But scientists say that's not the only reason for the rise. Returning holidaymakers, people ignoring social distancing guidelines, are also a big part of the problem. Today, Germany added parts of Croatia to a list of destinations to which Germans are advised not to travel. Spain, which registered nearly 6,700 cases in the last 20 Today, France registered nearly 3,800 cases. The president, Emmanuel Macron, has again ruled out imposing another national lockdown. Italy's numbers are much lower, but there's been a sharp rise recently, with nearly 650 recorded in the last 24 hours. Similarly, Switzerland has seen the highest number of daily cases since mid-April, and in one canton, 500 people have been quarantined after an outbreak in a local bar. Back over the border in Germany, experts are still quibbling over whether the current rise officially constitutes a second wave. But in another blow to those hoping to enjoy the traditions of a German autumn, Angela Merkel, herself extremely worried by the situation, has said that there was no way football fans could be allowed back into stadia for the start of the new Bundesliga season.
Thanks so much to Jenny Hill. But let me turn back to Dr. Emma Hudcroft. Your reaction, you mentioned where you are, Switzerland, there as well, but do you see something similar with these surges?
Yes, so I do think that we are seeing a definite trend across Europe. I do think there's differences between what's happening in India and Europe. In India, this is still very much, in many cases, kind of the first wave, if you want to call it that, where the cases haven't come down in a lot of areas. They might have plateaued, but then they've risen again. Whereas in Europe, in most countries, we did have the virus under control and cases went very low in many places. And it's definitely kind of the reopening that seems to have brought cases back up again. So there's slightly different kind of strategical planning going on in each place. But I do think the bottom line in both places is that we're trying to get the cases under control as much as possible. Particularly in Europe, this is tricky because we want to try and balance the economic benefits of being as open as possible while obviously keeping cases as low as we possibly can. The same is also true in India, but there's many cases there, and obviously the situation economically and developmentally is quite different, and so they face a really unique set of challenges.
Let me turn to, and you're going to stay with us for a little while, but we'll do this just for the next minute or so. Dr. Emma will talk about vaccines after the news. Some people, I think, feel reassured, I think this can even be in Ireland as well, that so many of the cases now are younger people, so we're not seeing the same level of hospitalizations, ICU, or deaths yet. What would you tell people when they say that?
Yeah, so this is what my Twitter thread from yesterday really focused on. We're seeing across Europe this trend where cases have gone up, but hospitalizations and deaths haven't. Now, a lot of people are taking this as a sign that maybe something's changed. You know, maybe the virus isn't so dangerous, or maybe, you know, everyone's protected somehow. But in reality, it's exactly what you said. We actually see that most people getting infected right now in Europe are actually younger. Now, the good side is they're less likely to have a severe outcome. But the problem is there's not really any reason to believe that the virus will only stay in young people. The example I used on Twitter was Florida, where they had a rise in cases in June after reopening, and these were initially in young people, so people were a bit comforted because hospitalizations and deaths weren't rising. But of course, we don't live as islands of population, and the higher cases get in young people, the more chance they will spill over into more vulnerable and older populations. This is exactly what happened in Florida, where the cases soon expanded into older age groups, and then deaths and hospitalizations started rising. So I really urge caution in Europe that we need to not be too complacent about the hospitalization rates right now.
We'll see where we are a month from now. Oh, it's disappointing, a lot of it. You're going to stay with us, Dr. Emma Hodcroft. We need to talk vaccines. So many people have been in touch with us with their opinion on whether a vaccine should be mandatory. So that's going to come up after a bulletin of the latest news in a couple of minutes' time.
In half an hour on the BBC World Service, it's Outlook with Emily Webb.
When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, Lieutenant General Russell L. Honoré headed up the response. The skills he needed to tackle the devastation were ones he learned growing up in poverty on a farm as a black child in the segregated South.
At 19 GMT, it's Assignment.
This is Owen Bennett-Jones, and I'm talking to Barbara Demick, a journalist who's recreated the stories of Tibet and North Korea using intensive interviews with people who have left.
That's followed by Science in Action. Here's Roland Pease.
A new temperature record measured in Death Valley in the United States accelerated destruction of the Greenland ice sheet and evidence that what happens in one part of the world quickly affects the climate elsewhere. We're back to the worrying implications of global warming.
That's all still to come on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to OS from the BBC World Service. I'm Mrna Vaccine. On this programme, we bring people together, sharing experiences as they live through this time of COVID-19. This week, we're exploring the impact of coronavirus on education around the world. So in a few minutes' time, we're going to hear from parents of children with special needs in Cape Town and Cincinnati. They share how they're coping without their usual support from schools, and also advice from a teacher in Jerusalem on how to make it through this stressful time.
BBC News with Chris Barrow. Donald Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has been arrested and charged with fraud and money laundering. He and 3 other men are accused of diverting hundreds of thousands of dollars from an online campaign to build a privately funded wall along the US-Mexico border. President Trump described the news of his arrest as sad and surprising. The Russian government says it's prepared to consider a request from the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny to be transferred outside the country for treatment. His supporters say Mr. Navalny, who's in hospital in a serious condition, was poisoned. The brother of the suicide bomber who carried out an attack in Manchester in 2017 has been sentenced to a minimum of 55 years in prison. The authorities in Belarus have begun a criminal case against an opposition council set up in response to President Alexander Lukashenko's disputed election victory earlier this month. The Prosecutor General's office seized power. The South Korean intelligence service says the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, has delegated some of his responsibilities to his sister. The new head of the agency in Seoul said Mr. Kim retained overall control. President Trump has suffered another setback in his effort to block the release of his tax returns to prosecutors. A judge in New York has dismissed a lawsuit by Mr. Trump that sought to block a subpoena for his financial records covering an 8-year period. And a prominent lawyer and activist in India has again refused to apologise for tweets critical of judges at the Supreme Court. Prashant Bhushan said he'd been doing his duty and safeguarding democracy. He was held in contempt of court for the posts last week. BBC News.
Welcome to OS. If you're just tuning in, welcome back. If you're with us for the first half hour, you're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Mrna Vaccine. Now, a little bit later this half hour, I want to share with you a message we got from Rabab. She's in Bangladesh. She lost her sense of smell and taste due to the coronavirus, and her symptoms, they really echo the latest information that's coming out from the medical community about how COVID-19 can affect you. Just listening to her cardboard was how she described her formerly favourite curry. Pretty fascinating, I thought, so I'm going to play that for you in about 15 minutes time as you help us tell the story of the pandemic. I want to turn back to my guest who was with us just before the news as well, Dr. Emma Hodcroft, molecular epidemiologist at the University of Basel in Switzerland. Emma, you know, we were discussing yesterday on the programme comments that were made by the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He was saying you should try and make the coronavirus vaccine as mandatory as you can. He did backtrack on those comments, I should say, but we threw it out to our listeners and people that are in touch with us on WhatsApp about should a vaccine, when it comes, for those more optimistic, be made mandatory for all. So huge reaction. Everyone has an opinion apparently on this. So I want to play a couple of the messages that came into us back to back, and then we'll discuss.
Hello, this is Bakar Ibrahim from Sudan, Khartoum. I really support the opinion of vaccination against coronavirus should be mandatory for everybody, regardless of the consequences of this vaccination, whether it's work or not, regardless of age, because we cannot bear another outbreak.
Hello BBC World Service, my name is Kelly Robson, calling from West Africa, Ghana. Vaccine shouldn't be mandatory, because if you want a vaccine to be mandatory, substance to everyone, that means you want to destroy the entire population. You never can tell whether the vaccine is real or not. You never know the symptom of this vaccine in the future.
Okay, one says yes, gotta have it. The other's like, you don't know about the long-term consequences of taking a vaccine. So somebody's very vaccine hesitant there. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? How would you go about, Dr. Emma, relaying the information, speaking to people about this?
Yeah, so this is incredibly important. I completely agree. And I see why this is a tough topic. So vaccines are particularly hard because they're a personal thing. Obviously, you as an individual get one, but their benefit is at a population level. So vaccines really work because of what we call herd immunity, where enough people get the vaccine that if one person gets sick, there's essentially nobody they can transmit it to. This is really important because some people can't get vaccines. They might be allergic to the ingredients or have problems with their immune system. And every now and then, someone just won't happen to get the right reaction to a vaccine. So they just won't develop the antibodies. We need to protect those people by making sure enough people get vaccinated. So your personal choice then influences kind of the public health. And this is why it's such a tough decision. I do think that making vaccines mandatory should be really a last resort. It's much better if we can get people to get vaccines of their own choice by making sure that we educate people well and they understand what a vaccine is and how it works. I think this has really been shown in the last few months by the amount of kind of what we call anti-vax theory, where people are feeling quite distrustful of science and vaccines. We know a lot about vaccines, but I think it shows a bit of a failure of communication in how people are reacting.
Yeah, I think the conversations really need to get underway right now if we are hoping for a vaccine in the next few months. Let's see. I'm optimistic. Dr. Emma Hodcroft, thank you very much for speaking to us. We'll speak to you again next week. Now, let me move on, still talking about coronavirus, really this time the impact on education. We've been talking about it all through the week. We've spoken to parents and teachers in the US, Denmark, Israel, South Africa. Really their concerns about reopening of schools. Today we brought together two mums. Both have a kid with special educational needs. Unati is in Cape Town, South Africa. Jamie's in Cincinnati in the States. And Sophia, who you'll also hear from, is a teacher at a special education high school in Jerusalem, Israel. Let's start with Jamie. She started telling me about her son.
His name is Cole. He's 7 years old. We thought he could have had autism, but we had him tested this past year, and it's ADHD. He has a lot of quirks that you would see from an autistic kid. Like, he won't look at you in the eyes. You have to say his name multiple times to get his attention. His attention span's just very short. In school, he has multiple therapists, 2 aides. He has a lot of help that he's not getting right now at home or when we were doing online services through the school.
Yeah, that must have been tough. You just talk about some of the help or support that you did have. How do you think that affected Cole?
A lot. He's used to his routine, waking up, getting on the bus. Like, every little thing he was used to, he loved to do. Just to see his friends and everything, to go this long without that. And then we can't really go anywhere and do anything. He's just bouncing off the walls. We've tried to do our own therapy, but him with he has 3 younger siblings. That distracts him as well. He just wants to go play.
Yeah. And when you say he's bouncing off the walls, I think a lot of parents will know exactly what that means, but maybe we could explore that a little bit further, because obviously it's also affecting you and probably the whole family. How does that manifest itself?
You know, he'll be fine in the morning, but once, a few hours in, we try to go outside, but he'll just start complaining that he's bored, he wants to go do something. Can we go to the park or amusement park? He'll literally start just jumping around on things too. So literally bouncing off the walls. So, I mean, we have a lot to do here. We have an in-ground swimming pool, a trampoline. That helps. He loves his trampoline. He loves to jump on that.
To try and help him do the bouncing, shall we say, when he's feeling like that. But I can understand that, and we'll come back also to the effects that it has on you, Jamie. Let me bring Unati, who's in Cape Town, in a township there. You also have a son. Tell us about him.
My son has a sensory processing disorder. He can copy and write, but he can't read. And he also struggles with his fine motor skills. During this pandemic, at the beginning, it was like, I'm getting everything under control. But since we were living in a one-room house, we can't do outdoor activities, and he likes outdoor activities. That also made his emotions to be so mixed up. It is a challenging time, and it made things so overwhelming also to me, because we are in a small room, we're doing everything in this space. He wants to play out, we cannot go out. When at the beginning, I found out his problem, his situation, I was so like a helpless parent, didn't know how to have my child. But I got to know it as time goes by, because I'm trying to adapt with the situation. It was like everything is new. Imagine you are in a small space, you are locked in this space for 24/7, you are in this space. So the mind is locked in this space. Even the thinking of your mind is the same of this space. You do not know what to do, what to provide for the child to come out of the situation that he is in. Because kids are used into a routine. All of a sudden, there is no routine.
So Jamie was telling us, Unati, how her son Cole was bouncing off the walls. How about your son? And his name is Owatando?
Owatando, yes. He likes outdoor activities, so he would wants to do all those things in this house. Everything is here. Would jump on top of the chairs. He wants to play out. He wants to practice those activities in this small space, and it's so dangerous. The kitchen is here, the bedroom is here, everything in this small space.
Let me bring in Sophia, a teacher at a special education high school just outside Jerusalem. Great to have you with us. You're hearing a little bit of the parents' stories as they struggle, Jamie and Unati. How has it been a teacher in these situations? And I don't know whether you've been able to work during these weeks and months.
Right. We're on summer holiday currently. We were working. However, with students like mine and like Jamie's and Unati's children, it's extremely difficult to give them what they need through the regular technological services, online worksheets and things like that. It was extremely difficult. I work with students on the behavioral spectrum, and some just completely disappeared for 13 weeks, just completely I couldn't get hold of them. And although in Israel, lockdown wasn't extremely severe. It was quite severe, but it wasn't that severe. So there were some students I had to leave my home and my family to drive to the town where I teach and look for them physically and find them.
And what had happened? The parents just had not stayed in touch with the school, or how do you explain it?
So some families are very dysfunctional. Some families, just lockdown put them into a tizzy. And also, I don't know how it went in other countries, but lockdown also included work, and some parents many people lost their jobs here, and parents just went into this kind of cocoon shell, needed to find survival skills, and couldn't really talk to me and couldn't find the strength and energy to handle any connection. It is important for me to say, however, that we talk about special needs. It's just a side note that someone very clever told me at the beginning when I started working with special needs that children with special needs aren't children with special needs. They're children with regular needs, completely regular needs like every other person. They need to be loved and cared for and seen like any other child. They just need to receive that in a special way.
I like that. And I also think sometimes we say special needs that it's just way too big a banner. You know what I mean? What Jamie is dealing with and what Unati is dealing with and the kids you're working with are completely different.
Definitely. It was very interesting listening to Jamie and Unati because they both spoke about routine. And routine is important for every child, but especially children with special needs, or the children who have the regular needs but need it, in their own special way. Routine is one of those special ways that really keeps these children together. And I know that many of my students, if not all, fell apart really during these times. And Unati said something very important. He said, I don't have the tools to help my child. I don't. And that's normal. That's okay, because she's a mother. She's not supposed to have these tools. The education system is supposed to have these tools to help. And the routine is supposed to have these tools. And I feel for you, both of you. I mean, we're with you. And I really hope that education system did manage to reach out and give you some sort of help or some sort of support.
Unati, would you like to respond?
You need to provide a routine, and you do not have resources. Financially, you are restricted, so it makes things so difficult. And as a mother, you see your child, and you see he is struggling. You feel so helpless and frustrated.
Routine is everything with my child, and then also with my child, like, he has issues with reading and writing because he also has like muscle issues because he's growing so fast. So he has issues with that, like riding a bike. We try to teach him those things, but, not having the occupational therapy. And I talk to the teachers at the end of the school year, but I haven't heard anything from them all summer. I try to go online and figure out activities to help them because I just don't want them to get so far behind. But I was pretty much doing the work for my son. Trying to get him to sit down and do it was impossible.
I just wonder, going back to Sophia, would you have any advice perhaps for Jamie or Unati as they tell you their stories?
Don't push it. Everything can be done at a later date. The reading, the writing, it will come. It might be a bit slower. It might take a bit more time, but it will come. As long as you keep some sort of calm atmosphere at home and a routine. We were all also my children were at home, so we were all kind of working at the same time. But I built a schedule for my students and sent it to the parents, just to give the parents an idea of what maybe a schedule for a teenager should look like in these days. They don't need to wake up at 7:30 in the morning if they're not going to school, and give them some sort of framework to their day.
It's a really interesting idea. What about that, Unati?
That's the great idea, and you see, that's what the children are interested in.
Unati, your son is 12, so you can even make the schedule together with him. He can give ideas and really break it down to tiny minor things. 8:30, wake up. 8:45, brush teeth. 9 o'clock, have breakfast. Like all these, you really break it down.
The only thing I think I would need the ideas of activities. The day cannot be boring. Because we wake up and they eat porridge. After eating porridge, I'm giving them their schoolwork. We are busy with their schoolwork, and then after schoolwork, what is it? Television. And the television is just now. They even like hallucinating because the television is there. Is there in the mind.
But maybe some of the ideas that Sophia was putting forward about, whether it's arts and crafts or whether it's reading together, or if you have internet access to kind of take a look around the world, or some exercises, some physical activities together?
Yeah, arts and crafts, but the internet, the access, because of the financial situation, that's the problem.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Internet
For
sex,
lots of people. Jamie, have you experimented with the schedule?
Not like an official schedule, but we have all those. They have their own tablets. We have a swimming pool, a big backyard, trampoline. So he has all these things, every toy he could imagine, but he just misses his friends.
You're missing that school support, I think, is what I'm hearing from you, Jamie. Those other people that can help, whether it's the occupational therapist or...
I think that one of the most important messages I have for parents of all children on any spectrum is that you need to also allow yourself to forgive yourself for days that don't go well, and forgive yourself for days that you lose it, or forgive yourself for the days that you let them sit in front of the television for 10 or 12 hours, or that you didn't bring all your creativity out, and you didn't have 20 different non-repetitive activities for them to do. You need to let yourself say, it's all right, it's okay. My child woke up in the morning and he's still alive when he went back to bed, and he's loved and cared for and fed, and everything is okay, and tomorrow's a new day, and really treat every day as a new day, because also these kids wake up differently really every day, and every day is a new opportunity with them.
She sounds like a fabulous teacher, doesn't she, Sophia? She teaches at a special education high school in Jerusalem in Israel, and also our lovely parents Unati, who's in Cape Town, South Africa, and Jamie in Cincinnati in the States. We wish them the best of luck. Jamie and Unati, really, they're waiting to hear, will the schools that their kids go to reopen, how, when, so we really wish them the best in the coming weeks. McGovern with you on OS from the BBC World Service. Right, let's take a look at some stories that are breaking on our entertainment pages right now that the team are working on. One is Netflix. They have removed a promotional image from its site which showed girls posing in skimpy outfits. Actually, I came across this. It's for a new French film called Cuties, which follows an 11-year-old dance student. Its maker says it's meant to tackle the issue of the sexualization of young girls, but after an online petition, Netflix have removed the controversial image. It's an interesting story behind that. Maybe we'll look into it further. The British rock band Queen, they are still failing to get the US President Donald Trump to stop using their songs. They say they did not give permission for their hit We Will Rock You to feature Mr. Trump's latest online campaign video, but their repeated requests for it to be removed have so far been ignored. And can you imagine a Marvel film full of powerful women? Well, that's what lots of fans are talking about online, as apparently actress Olivia Wilde has been asked to develop and direct a female-centric superhero movie. Very few details. Isn't that something that is groundbreaking? Shouldn't be right. The rumour is it's going to star Spider-Woman. Sounds good. Let us turn to sports headlines now, and we have Dominic Busby standing by. Hi, Dominic.
Hello there. Hi. Yeah, there are more signs of good news for sport in China actually returning to normality. The Chinese Super League plan to allow a limited number of spectators into a high-profile match on Saturday. Well, this would be the first time fans would be allowed into a game since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. The Chinese Super League kicked off minus fans on the 25th of July. It's being played at neutral venues owing to the health crisis, but as many as 500 fans from Shanghai and rivals Beijing could attend this weekend's game. Should this go well, it's hoped that it will be a major step towards normalising
thanks to the trade war with the US and mass flooding in agricultural areas, and now, according to the president, because of the pandemic. So they feel these videos really go against that sort of messaging that they're trying to get across.
Do we know what the influencers think?
Yeah, so it's led to a